Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Data Management Specialist Group and our AGM for 2020. For those that don't know me, I'm Julian Schwarzenbach. I'm chair of the Data Management Specialist Group, and helping me run the event today is Glenn Val, our event secretary, who, according to GoToWebinar, due to an admin issue, his spelling of his name is slightly amiss, so it's only one N and V-A-A-L rather than V-A-L-L. But there we go, that's Glenn. So,
good afternoon.
What we normally do when we're running an AGM, because I'm not a great fan of AGMs being run for the sake of it, is we make it normally fairly short and informal, typically running about 10 minutes before an event with the speaker, so people turn up for the speaker. However, we're looking in a very, very different world, so we thought we'd actually use the fact that we've got a webinar to allow people to sit in around their lunchtime and have a slightly more sort of two-way AGM to allow people to have a little bit of a view of what we're doing. So there'll be a chair's report, well, treasurer's report, quick election of the committee, any other business, and then we'll swap over so we can actually then unmute people and get comments from them as to what people would feel we need to look at in the future. So just as a quick reminder for some of the things that we've done this year, we've actually had quite a busy year, much busier than a few previous years. So that's a list since October last year, which was one after our AGM, where of the events we've had, which included a virtual conference in June. We've obviously, like most people, been dealing with the challenges that COVID presents for us all. But it's actually meant that we've actually been able to host quite a large number of events that have generally been reasonably well attended. The content has typically been very good. The recordings of all those are now up on the BCS member groups channel on YouTube. So if you're not sure and you want to go back and have a look at any of the videos, that's where they all are. So yeah, just quickly going through, we had Judy Payne doing stuff about knowledge management and describing the content of her book, which was really interesting. So the penny for me has finally dropped as to what knowledge management is all about. Mike Bagembe, very engaging speaker, so we actually did that one as more of an in-conversation web session rather than a presentation, which went down very well. Using data to decarbonise, Richard Dobson from the Energy Systems Catapult. Then in genetic programming, the virtual conference where we had a whole range of presentations, all pretty much all of them very high quality events. That is the change, because we normally every year have a joint event with Army as a one-day event, and rather than trying to squeeze that all into a one-day webinar, which would be a little bit of an ordeal, we actually split it across a whole week. So there was a 11 o'clock webinar, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and then a 4 o'clock in the evening afternoon webinar. So we then had 2 webinars per day for the whole week, which made it a little bit easier for people. 1st of July, Dan Cope, one of our committee members, he led a discussion between Sheila Fitzpatrick and Steve Wright on data privacy and COVID, and looking at some of the issues that it presents. 2 rail-related ones. So first was Dr. Xiaosheng Gay from the University of Huddersfield on the safety analysis in the rail system, and then Peter Hughes was our most recent webinar. He was looking at state-of-the-art text analytics to analyse incident reports. And the other presentation we had in September was Peter Thomas talking about data strategy and particularly about how to enhance your data-driven business. So that's a range of the events that we've done. Something else that you may not have been aware of, but has also we've been involved with. So I represented the BCS as well as the past president Jim Norton on a committee that were developing a couple of standards triggered by big data, about looking at what people need to do in terms of big data, what guidance you need to be better enabled. So we've come up with 2 standards that were published earlier this year, BS 10102 Part 1 and Part 2. So Part 1 is all about guidance on data-driven organisations, what the key principles you need to have in place, what are the key factors you need to think about to be data-driven and fit in with what you're doing as an organisation. And then BS 10102 Part 2 was then about data-intensive projects. Are the specific things you need to think about in terms of any projects that you're running? So those are both standards that are out, published now. I'm not sure about what the take-up has been. I think it's probably BSI have been a bit slow on publicising it, so it might not be high, but if you're in an organisation that are interested in being a little bit better at how they exploit their data, those are probably both worth a read if you can get access to them. So in previous years, previously BCS have tried to encourage us to come up with quite a long formal report for what we've been doing for the year, but this year they're going for a slightly shorter format, saying, well, actually just talk about 3 successes, 3 plans for next year, 3 challenges, etc. And that I think works much better to make a less formal AGM. So successes, I think the virtual conference in June was a particular success, both from the technology aspect and also from the content and the approach. So overall, that was a very successful event. And bearing in mind some of the other virtual conferences that I'm being invited to, one of which today was 10 days. The first 2 days started with 2 12-hour continuous webinars. Yeah, I think some people haven't quite got it. It's quite a grueling session. So by splitting it to 2 per day for a week, I think we came up with a far more easily accessible approach. I think we'd already been trialing webinars last year, and with virtual working being sort of mandatory now pretty much, it's now meant that we've actually been able to do that far more successfully. So all our events are webinars, our committee meetings are virtual and have been for quite some time. So I think we've actually been able to make the transition to virtual working particularly successfully. I think this year as well, we've had quite an active committee. Some committee members have work commitments that have got in the way of things, but compared to, I think, about 3 years ago, where Glenn and I were the ones who were the mainstays of keeping everything going, it feels much more like a balanced load this year. So that's been very useful. That's been a bit of a success, I think. What are we thinking about doing next year? So I think at the moment, the plan is to run webinars for the foreseeable future, although the plan is until the early new year to just do webinars, and then people are thinking about the physical events. I would have is that with people's changing work patterns, even if we did do a physical event, it might not attendance. I think next year, I think we'll probably plan to try and repeat the conference again when we get to the joint event with Dharma in the new year. And I think also the success of the In Conversation with event with Mike Bugembe, we'd actually got 2 events like that planned for this year, but because of the GoToWebinar format, I think it wouldn't work quite as well. So we're going to look at how we can run those in a more successful way in the future. So those are some of the key challenges for our plans for next year. The challenges we've had and have got coming up is obviously COVID-19 restrictions it places on all of us is a bit of a challenge, but actually I also see it as an opportunity, because it means that for those in, let's say, Inverness, who might find getting to a physical event in London a bit of a challenge, it now has opened up the accessibility to our webinars events very, very considerably. So it's both a challenge, I think it's also an opportunity. I think one of the things that is a challenge, and it will be ongoing going into the future, is that now that with so many physical events now being converted to webinars, there is a huge amount of competition for different events being run as webinars, and without a crowded marketplace for other people trying to get your attention to spend an hour of your time on their webinars. So I think we will continue to think about how best we can address that, keeping events reasonably short and punchy as much as we can. And we're going to actually get your feedback a little bit later in this meeting covering that. And then finally, I think the challenge is just keeping the committee engagement. So trying to make sure that all the committee, as much as they can with work and family commitments, are able to take part and make sure they can put some input into what we do as a group. So those are the challenges coming up. I think also I'd like to make some thank yous. So we've got 2 committee members who are standing down this year. So Joe Kent's been supporting us for a couple of years, Martin for a few years longer. Both of those are standing down. Jo in particular, she's doing some distance learning, and therefore the challenge of committee work as well is decided is to do all in one go. So I'd like to thank them for their efforts, but I'd also like to thank the rest of the committee for their support during the year. We'll come on to who the committee are shortly. Thank you to Mandy as well and the rest of the BCS team in Swindon. I think the BCS, having had a couple of years where things have got a little bit stale and there was not much engagement with the member community, I think there is now, through Basecamp and other forums, there's now far more engagement, so that is useful. But also thank you for attending up to the various webinars that we've had and the various events that we've got and continue to engage with us, and also for turning up today, so that's useful. We've got Terry Friedman is having some technical issues. He's our treasurer, so he's on the phone rather than actually being properly connected to us. So what I've done is that I've copied the final report at the end of last year. Terry, I wonder if you just want to talk us through any of the financial highlights for last year.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can indeed.
Oh, excellent. Right. Financial highlights. We spent about 200 quid out of our budget of about 700. And it looks as though we're going to spend less and less because we're not giving gifts out. We're not paying for food or drink. And only the Dharma event would seem to be one that might attract more flow of monies, as it were. But when we're all remote and sitting in our seats, we can't really ask them to provide us with lunch or drink. So since it becomes a sort of zero cost event, except for communications. Apart from that, as I say, we hardly spent any money at all. So we've got plenty of money in our draft accounts. We haven't actually received a positive notice yet of how much money we're being allowed. So I believe it's at least £700, which will more than cover the 200 we spent this year if it's repeated again next year. I can't see any difference in the model that we're using. Julian's managed the finances in that sense extremely well. Thank you, Julian. And I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions.
Well, I think there's two other points to add. One is the fact that all the financial transactions are handled by BCS centrally. So in effect, their accounts, their auditing keeps the check on us. So what we're presenting here is in fact the reports of what's gone through the system. It's already been audited by the BCS to make sure that they are appropriate. And the other one is looking forward. I think BCS, like many professional bodies, with COVID-19, it's presenting quite a few challenges, both from an operational perspective in terms of how things are done, but also from a financial perspective in terms of the membership fees that people are paying, whether people are still keeping to be members or not, and other sources of income are sort of potentially threatened. So I think all professional bodies, BCS is no exception to that, will need to be a little bit nimble going forward in terms of how they address their finances in the future. So if you have got any questions, if you can raise it on that, just use the question functionality in GoToWebinar or use the chat, but hopefully that's just taken as read. No questions popping up. So as regards for committee for next year, we've got a slight change around of members within the committee. So I'm proposing to stay on as chair. Dan, who joined the committee last year, has expressed interest in becoming vice chair to join Lisa. So in fact, we're going to be running that as a joint position rather than having some kind of contested approach to that. So it's a joint session there. Glenn's going to be carry on as Glenn, or would like to carry on as event secretary, and that's the correct spelling of Glenn's name. Terry would like to stay on as treasurer. Ed is moving into the communications, social media side of things. Jagdev is going to stay on as academic liaison, but is also going to be the diversity and inclusion officer. So that's the proposed committee for 2021. And now with the wondrous power of GoToWebinar, I can click launch. So hopefully you should now be seeing a poll that will allow you to click if you're comfortable with the proposed committee. If you can vote for that. If you're not sure, click on the abstain. If you're against, if you've got an objection, by all means click against that. I think there are, if there was anybody who's against, we'll actually raise them in the chat and just find out if there are any particular issues. So I think everybody's voted, so we'll close that. And then I should be able to share that by the power of the technology. Oops, audience view. Sorry, I can't see that. So what you should be seeing there, I think we've got a 100% success rate on that, so that's quite useful. So thank you to all. Right, now let's see if I can turn myself back to what we were. Good. Right, sorry, this is the first time we run polls on GoToWebinar, so this is a little bit of a new venture for us. So really, that's the end of the more formal bit of the AGM. But before we close that, just like to open this up and see if anybody's got any other business they'd like to raise or any questions we've got based on what's happened over the last year. Again, I think probably the easiest way of doing that is if you raise that as a question in the questions section of GoToWebinar. Okay, so I'll take it that there's no questions coming in, that people are comfortable with that. So now we get on to the slightly more dynamic part of the AGM, the Have Your Say session. So this is where we're interested in actually finding out a little bit more about what your thoughts are about the event, the nature of events and activities that we run. So we're going to run a few polls. We're going to see what the outputs of those are, which will be interesting. So first one is just trying to get an idea of the number of events that we run. So whether do you feel we're getting it about right, not too few events, too many events. We're going to have some more about the nature of the events, so we'll come on to that a little bit later. So unfortunately, GoToWebinar allows you only limited numbers of questions per go. So we've got about 60% voted, so most people seem to be comfortable that's about right at the moment. Okay, give it another couple of seconds. The result there. So you see that I think everybody seems to think it's about right. Next one to test out. Hide that before I do anything else. One of the things we're also interested to find out a little bit more is about what you think about the length of the events. So do the events tend to be about the right length? Are they about too short, too long? That's going to be an interesting one to see what we do. So that's 73% voted, so just give another moment. Okay, right, so I'll share that one so you can see what that is. So generally people think we've got the events about right. There's a couple, or there's a small percentage there have got a view that potentially the events are too short. So that is something we will bear in mind as to going forward with how we run up on our events.
Julian, could we possibly ask through the chat or through the questions for those people who think that they are sometimes too short, what would they like extended? Would it be the Q&A sections, or is it this particular? Obviously, some events were too short for some people. Why? What did they feel they were missing?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Glenn. Useful input. And then there's another event, another poll coming up now, which I think is more future looking. So if we get to the point where we can do physical events again, I'd be interested to know whether your preference is for webinars only, live events only, or carry on having a mix of webinars and live events. Okay, 90% voted, so that was a quick response there, so we'll share that. So yes, so I think the view is very much webinars and live events. And I think when we get through to planning and thinking about live events, we're going to be careful about how we plan those to obviously make it easiest for people to attend, and also try and make sure they're broadcast as well at the same time. And then final poll is, I'm not sure if people attended the session with Mike Bagembe, but interested to know if you want to have more of in conversation with type events. In other words, just a couple of slides to introduce the same. It's much more of a conversation with an expert about their career, their perspectives on a particular topic. So it becomes a more dynamic session. Okay, so we've got, yeah, good. Everybody voted on that one, so just share that.
Something else, Julian, if I may.
Yeah.
What about when we, Terry here, when we have live events, is there any reason why we can't put those out as a webinar at the same time?
That's what we'll try and do. That's what I said we'll try and do. So I think the view from people is that they would, if we are doing physical events, we'll also try and broadcast them as well. I think BCS in London has got the capabilities. If we do run events anywhere else, we will need to think through about the technology and how that's used. So in terms of the sort of in conversation with events, I think there's nobody saying no, we don't want any of those. That's good to hear. A couple of sort of smaller percentages unsure, but actually we've got quite a few people who are saying yes, let's have more of those. So I think that's useful information to take on board. So thank you for that. Just hide that. And then the penultimate, or the last slide where we're trying to get some features here is we're actually interested to know a little bit more about which of the subjects that you might want to have events run on, because obviously data and data management is a very broad church. There's a lot of things we could cover. So it'd be useful if you use the chat or the question to give us a view of what your thoughts are about the subjects that we could cover. But also, if you have a particular somebody you've seen speak at another event, you think actually they'd be really good for a BCS event, be interested to know what if you've got any more thoughts on, let us know who they are and we can try and get in contact with them. And I think because we've actually got relatively few people online at the moment, what I'll do is also, I'm going to unmute everybody. So the power of muting is now on to yourselves. Whoops, unmute all. So yeah, so if people want to actually ask the questions directly, they can do so. So what subjects are you interested in? Nothing coming up here in questions, nothing on chat as yet. So we'd just be interested in any thoughts. We will obviously try and make sure there's a fairly varied programme, but it will be useful just to get some thoughts. Martin, I think, put his hand.
Yeah, can I we possibly have a even longer possible event around the government data strategy, which I'm sure a lot of you like me have waded their way through recently.
Very good suggestion. Yeah, I think that'll be good. I think that one could be one where it's worth maybe getting a couple of people as a bit of a panel debate. So rather than being a formal presentation, that could be quite a useful one to do as a debate. Would you agree with that, Martin, or do you think an alternate approach might be?
Yes, I think that worked very well, because when you read it, it covers such a wide area. I don't think you'd get one sort of expert to do the whole thing. So either panel debate or a series of shorter views on certain parts of it.
Yes.
And then maybe some from different perspectives, and then a panel debate Q&A session.
Yeah, certainly. That's a good suggestion, Martin. So thank you for that one. We'll certainly add that onto the list going forward. Yeah, I think that there is. I mean, I've not read all of it yet. I've gone through a fair amount of it, but there's a lot of detail, a lot of things in there to digest, and I think it'll both take a while to fully understand the planned implications of it. But also okay, what does it mean for everybody and what they need to do? So yeah, that's going to be interesting to see what change that drives. But yeah, that's good. Okay. I think we've also had a question raised. Is that right? I'm trying to maximize the pane so I can see what it says. Tony, financial analysis. Okay. So Tony, do you want to put yourself off mute and tell us a little bit more about what you think about what your reasoning is around financial analysis? Because again, that's quite a large subject. Okay, obviously not wanting to unmute, but yes, net future value and present value. Okay. Got a suggestion from Jagdev, who's one of the committee, and I think this is actually also a very good one, using a day in the life type presentations from some female role models in data management to encourage more girls into the field. And I think that's also a very good suggestion. And actually, I've got a couple of thoughts off the top of my head of people who can discuss as potential speakers for that. So that's a good idea. Ed, you've got your hand up.
Hello, Julian. Can you hear me?
Yes, can indeed. Go ahead, Ed.
Hi there. Just for the record, I know we've discussed these already, but just so that we've got them written down in the same place, I'd like to see something about open data, looking at the open banking system and how that's going to be used as a model for open energy. So that's one thing I'd like to see. And also, it was suggested, and I agreed with it, was something about IM versus IT and where IM fits in the organisation and how much dependency there should be between information management and information technology and how those should work together or not.
Yes. Yeah, and we've also had a suggestion from Anura Kotarachi, sorry, apologies if I pronounced that wrongly, about data security in the cloud, which I think is also very, very pertinent. I think also that ties in, I know that one of our committee, Dan Cope, is very much into data privacy, and I've been involved in some of the work on security standards, and I think it's a really interesting topic. And it's far wider sometimes than just pure sort of antivirus. It's how I think about who you're sharing your data with, what is that, what about the privacy implications of any personal information. So I think that's yeah, that's a good suggestion. In terms of the all-day event that we have, or normally it's an all-day event, it might be next year, you never know, or a virtual conference that we do with DARMA UK, we normally go through and have a theme for the week. So this session this year was about delivering value through data. Previous year was about data visualization. We then had a couple of sessions on GDPR in sort of different years. So what do we need to do and how are we doing? Any particular topics or thoughts that you might have around subjects that might be worth exploring in much wider detail? Not at the moment there. Okay, another comment from Tony. So thank you for all these suggestions from Tony, really useful. How to ensure data availability and data performance in database management systems. So yeah, I think that's really good, and I think knowing Glenn's background, I think that's probably one that will be yeah, I can see him nodding there. I think that's one that will be a really good one to think about. And yeah, without sort of going too far, I think one of the speakers we've had before, who Glenn knows, might actually be quite a good one to engage on that one again. So yes, that'll be a useful one. So thank you for that, Tony, really useful. Appreciate we're running up to 1 o'clock. We said we're only going to run this for half an hour to make it nice and short so it can fit in with people's lunch breaks. So any last suggestions? I've seen Jagdev's put another one in advances in temporal databases. That sounds like that could be quite a good topic to explore. Another quick one, just to get a quick show of hands from people, is we've had a few webinars this year been delivered by PhD researchers at universities about their work. Is that something that you'd like to see more of? So if you just click on the raise hands thing, that would be a good way of just finding out if people are interested. So I can see there's one hand, two, yeah. Okay, so we'll do some more, and I think with Jagdev with their academic liaison, in fact, yeah, quite a few hands have come up on that one, so that's really good to know. So I think we'll use some of the academic liaison links that we've got and just see if we can pick up some more researchers and some more work that's coming through. So yeah, that's really good. Okay, so thank you all for your time on that. So we'll just, I say we're running up to 1 o'clock, and I don't want to overrun because that's would have been polite, taking up more of your time than was intended. So thank you very much for attending. I think afterwards, I think if you've got any thoughts about whether you like this format of AGM, particularly whether it's done as a webinar rather than as a physical meeting, it'd be useful to get some feedback on that. But thank you all for attending, and thank you for your interest in the Data Management Specialist Group and for helping make IT good for society. So that's the overall BCS objective. So I'll end the call here, but thank you for your time. That's really useful.
Thank you, Julian and Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Cheers.